I want to look at some more of these prophecies in ancient Aramaic texts, especially prophecies that deal with the Assyrians. And one of the things that I'm going to be dealing with in some upcoming lessons, I'm going to be looking at the early church fathers to help us to understand what ancient or early Christianity looked like. Recently, I was mentioning this prophecy teacher named Grant Jeffries, and one of the things he was saying is that we need to consult the early church fathers, and he's specifically saying that there's a great body of literature in Aramaic. Many things from the Aramaic have been translated to English and have been translated for some time. If you get the early church fathers, you have an entire volume where most of it's ancient Aramaic literature. Probably several volumes, but he was lamenting the fact that there's a lot of literature that hasn't been translated. And specifically, he was trying to find evidence of a pre-tribulation rapture. And the interesting thing, if you get his book on the apocalypse, his book on Armageddon, as I mentioned, you had the so-called satanic nun, Tucker Carlson's nun, who likes John 6:66, which is her favorite verse in the whole Bible, as she said, which is about people losing faith and turning away from Christ. I think that's her mission. Now, this woman is really, truly demonic. But she was stating that what many evangelicals and Protestants believe about the second coming of Jesus Christ is not true and was actually condemned in a church council, which is not true at all. That church council she was referring to is when the Nicene Creed in the form which we're familiar with was presented or published. So what she was saying is factually untruth. She's thinking that people would take her word for it and not look for the facts themselves. And that's something that's going on right now, is you have all these people saying, well, we have the church fathers and they were, Roman Catholic just like today. If you look at the church fathers, you'd be a Roman Catholic or Eastern Orthodox. And I don't think that's true. I've read the church fathers. The church fathers proclaimed basic biblical New Testament theology. And the New Testament has a preeminent place. The preeminent place in the New Testament is because the New Testament is the apostolic tradition par excellence. It's the ultimate standard. It's what the apostles actually wrote. And that's what we have to judge everything by. Whatever the church fathers said, and actually sometimes the church fathers represent diverse opinions. The ultimate authority is what the apostles wrote down. But I want to look at this prophecy. So what's going on with Grant Jeffries is he believes in a pre-tribulation rapture. And the idea is that you're going to have the man of sin, the Antichrist, revealed, and then there's going to be 3.5 years where the Antichrist seems to be a man of peace, and then we have the Great Tribulation, the last 3.5 years, where judgments and the woes fall upon the earth. And it culminates with the Battle of Armageddon and the second coming of Jesus Christ. So there's the idea of the rapture, where we meet the Lord in the air. And the question is, when does this event happen? And some evangelicals, most evangelicals, believe that the rapture is going to take place before the Great Tribulation. This is the secret rapture, where all the righteous people vanish off the face of the earth. But one of the issues about that, if you look at the book of Revelations, there's no, in the Apocalypse, the book of Revelation of St. John, there's no rapture mentioned at all. What the book of Revelation is about is how they overcame by the word of their testimony, the blood of the Lamb and the word of their testimony, and how the righteous endure persecution, and many are martyred during the Great Tribulation. That's the focus of the book of Revelation, is enduring and overcoming persecution and accepting martyrdom. But there are other scriptures they use to argue for a pre-tribulation rapture. But one of my big issues with the pre-tribulation rapture is like, man, why? Well, the Lord doesn't want his people to suffer. It's like, all the 12 apostles suffered. The tradition is that John died of old age. It's only by divine intervention, by miracles, that John, the beloved disciple, lived to old age. They put him, they attempted to execute him several times. Threw him in a vat of boiling oil. They tried to get him to take poison. And the traditions is that he was sent to the Isle of Patmos after several unsuccessful attempts to martyr him. So the Lord wasn't finished with John. He had to write the gospel. He had to receive the apocalypse, the vision of the apocalypse. those things had to happen, so the Lord was not going to allow them, no matter what they put him through, for him to die. And the tradition is he died of old age, probably around the year 103, 106, something around. So he lived into the 2nd century, barely. But there are scriptures that they appeal to for the people who advocate a pre-tribulation rapture. There's different opinions, right? Some people believe that before the 7 years tribulation, there's going to be a rapture of the saints. Or some people think, well, in the middle of the tribulation, before the great tribulation. Others say, well, we're called up to meet the Lord in the air. We join him at his second coming. I believe in a post-tribulation rapture event. Because that's how John describes it in the little apocalypse in John chapter 13. It says after the great tribulation, then it describes the rapture event. So Jesus says in the end of in the little apocalypse, as they call it, in the Gospel of Mark, he describes the rapture event as happening, in his words, not mine, after the tribulation. But people interpret it differently. I think this is not a vital. There's room for debate. That's what I'm saying. It's not a vital issue. There's certain doctrines that we have to believe in. That Jesus died on the cross for our sins, that he rose again. Like if somebody denies, I'll give you an example, Marcus Borg. He was a Bible scholar, and he did not believe that Jesus actually, literally, physically rose again from the dead at all. I don't know how he explained it, because the apostles clearly believed that Jesus resurrected, but he didn't, as a skeptic, he didn't believe in that. But Marcus Borg would say, if you ask him his religion, I'm a Christian. I believe in the teachings of Jesus Christ and his moral code. And that's all fine and good, believing in Jesus Christ as a great philosopher, moral teacher. But I wouldn't consider Marcus Borg a Christian because he doesn't believe in the resurrection. He's passed away now. God save his soul. I actually believe that, I don't know. God's the ultimate judge. We all stand before the judgment seat of Christ. But according to divine revelation in the scriptures, it's necessary to believe in the atoning death and the resurrection. Right? If you don't believe that Jesus died for your sins and rose again, you cannot be saved. I don't know I know what Marcus Borg taught during his life, and he was a good scholar. I have to admit that. There's things that he had good insight about, but he's not a Christian in the end. Not from the biblical point of view. Whatever he called himself. So what I'm saying is there are certain things, like when is the rapture going to take place? Exactly. I think we can disagree on that. There are certain things that we cannot disagree on, like the death and resurrection or the virgin birth, because these things are taught by the scripture. And if you can debate or it doesn't seem clear about the rapture, the important thing is that Jesus is coming again, not exactly the time frame of the rapture, in my opinion. And of course, I lean towards a post-tribulation rapture, but who knows, But anyway, we had this Syriac prophecy, which is attributed to St. Ephrem. And right here I have St. Ephraim's commentary on the Diatessaron, which is the harmony of the Gospels. You see the Aramaic text right there. Unfortunately, the Tatian the Assyrian, one of the early church fathers, and he was the disciple of St. Justin Martyr. And I've read some of St. Justin Martyr's works. He's a great mind, a great Christian. I'm not necessarily saying I agree with everything he said, but a great thinker, a great advocate for Christianity, and he was a martyr. But one of the greatest of the early church fathers, and Tatian was his disciple. And Tatian put together, collated the first harmony of the four Gospels called the Diatessaron, and it was canonized in the Aramaic churches. That was the version of the gospel that they used in church, they preached from, what they taught from, what they wrote commentaries on, was the Diatessaron of Tatian the Assyrian. But what happened is later it was suppressed because there were certain theologians in the Assyrian church and other Eastern churches, the Syriac churches, who thought that they wanted to bring themselves into conformity with the practices of the greater Christian world. And I understand, it's like we should use the four Gospels. I understand the concept, but to censor it to such an extent that the Aramaic text doesn't even exist anymore, hasn't been found yet, we're able to reconstruct the text of the Aramaic Diatessaron. Diatessaron, perhaps, it seems like he did two versions. He did a version in Greek and he did a version in Aramaic. and his Aramaic Harmony of the Four Gospels became the standard version of the Gospel used by Aramaic Christians. And we have a translation into Arabic, and Aramaic are very similar. So the Arabic translation, the Diatessaron, which is translated directly from the Aramaic, probably gives us the best picture, perspective of what the Diatessaron. So we don't have it in its original language, but we do have it in a translation from one Semitic language to a very close to related Semitic language. And then we have the commentary here, which also helps us to reconstruct it, by Ephrem the Syrian. And Ephrem the Syrian was a theologian. He was also a poet. And you have this division in the Syriac churches, and the Aramaic churches, which basically you have the Church of the East and the Syrian Orthodox Church. But before that division took place, you had Ephrem the Syrian. So he's respected and beloved by the two main branches of the Syriac churches. So we have this book of prophecy. And like I mentioned, we have Aphrahat. And that name's actually Farhad, but and I guess the Aramaic or Latin version of the Aramaic is Aphraphat. And he wrote about biblical prophecy. And it's very interesting. Like I was saying, they try to make it look like, oh, you Protestants are out of the norm. But if you look at some of the early church fathers, certain of them, they're writing. I'll give you an example. The Didache. The Didache teaches believers' baptism by immersion. It does make an allowance for sprinkling if you're in a very arid region where you don't have access to a lot of water and somebody wants to be baptized. It says, well, you can do pouring in that instance, but you're supposed to be full body immersion is taught by the Diatessaron. And I really, if you read the Diatessaron, I don't think there's anything in there that evangelicals or Protestants would not agree with or take issue with. So I want to look at this prophecy, which is called Pseudo-Ephraim. Ephraim is writing in the 300s, but this Pseudo-Ephraim is understood to be written by Ephraim, but it probably is at least 200 to 300 years after, probably about 250 years or so after, probably around the emergence of Islam. So maybe in the early, or it's scholars guesstimate, right, or estimating exactly when this is written, but it could have been written around the year Islam emerged and became a global power. But in the early stage of the Islamic conquest, when we first had this exposure to Islam, is probably when Pseudo-Ephraim is written. But that's, like I said, that's speculation. But it's called Pseudo-Ephraim because even though it's attributed to Ephraim, scholars don't believe he wrote it. They believe it was written after his lifetime. But with Grant Jeffries, we have a Latin version of Pseudo-Ephraim, and then you have the original Aramaic. And the Latin translator, he's not making a very, it's a translation, but it's a very freewheeling translation. He's not translating every word and phrase exactly. He's doing it in his own words. For instance, this is the issue. Grant Jeffries looks at this certain verse and Pseudo-Ephraim in the Latin version, and it says before the Great Tribulation, the righteous ones are taken away unless they see these terrors. And so Grant Jeffries says, look there, that's teaching a pre-tribulation rapture. But the Aramaic seems to say that the righteous people who die are blessed because they don't endure the Great Tribulation. It's not saying that they're raptured or they're all raptured. It's just saying that those who die before the Great Tribulation are spared a great trial and a bad fate, right? It's like if you die at the beginning of the tribulation, you're lucky because it's going to be a very hard time. That's what the Aramaic seems to be saying. But the Latin translation, but with Grant Jeffries, I have to concede that if you look at the way it's worded in Latin, it does sound like, but that's not the original Aramaic, right? So did Pseudo-Ephraim write about a pre-tribulation rapture? It doesn't sound like if you read the original Aramaic. Did the Latin translator write it in such a way which you could use to argue for a pre-tribulation rapture? I mean, it looks that way to me. So the best you can say is that the Latin translator had an idea. The Latin translator who did not translate it literally and who took liberties with the text believed that there would be a pre-tribulation rapture. And I do respect, even though I might not necessarily agree with them, I think that that book on the the Apocalypse that Grant Jeffrey wrote is very useful, because what we as evangelicals are having, speaking for as an evangelical, we're being attacked by the Catholics. Oh, you've left the true faith because, the church fathers, all the original church fathers were believed exactly the way we do, like 21st century Roman Catholicism. That's what they're, it's like, oh really? We have to, you're not going to change these Catholics' minds, right? But we have to answer these criticisms to safeguard our faith. And what's going to happen is once you present that, no, our beliefs as evangelicals are reflective of the early church, and we can prove it, they'll say, well, it doesn't matter what the early church... This is what they're going to do. Once you do that, well, it doesn't really matter what the early church said or believed because we believe in the authority of the Pope, and he determines what's right or wrong, not what the early church fathers... Like I'm saying, the scriptures determine what's right or wrong, not the early church fathers. But I believe the early church fathers did advocate and believe the authority of the New Testament, and the early church period was reflective of New Testament Christianity and much akin to what evangelicals preach and believe today, as much as Roman Catholicism and Eastern Orthodox Church. And here's my perspective: is I'm not denying that the Roman Catholic Church or the Eastern Orthodox Church are actual and true representations of the church. I'm recognizing them as valid expressions of Christianity, but they won't give that to us. And like I said, this isn't about. It's not really about what the early church fathers said, because once we present a strong argument that evangelicalism does represent the early church fathers and the early church period, they'll go to a different argument. But we have to come up with a comprehensive argument because this is, our faith is being attacked and we have to respond. So we're going to have to read the church. And as I mentioned before, Martin Luther was very strong on the church fathers, so was John Wesley. But as a whole, evangelicals have been weak on that period of church history. What Protestants tend to do is they think that, once we have the New Testament written, there's a great falling away of the church, and then it wasn't restored until the Reformation. But there were, you had schisms, and like I mentioned, talk about, people breaking off of the church. What do you have? You got the Church of the East, you got the Syrian Orthodox Church, you got the Coptic Church. We already have division of the church not long after the Council of Nicaea. So it's not like the Protestants were the first one to have factionalism and so-called schism. And like right now, I really do believe, I'm concerned about the Catholic Church because the Catholic Church is headed towards schism. Why would you say that? Because Pope Leo invited transgender people for, we're going to have a big convention here in Rome, and I want transgender, men claiming to be women and people getting these surgeries. Pope Leo has given them validity. And just a few weeks ago, he met with a man who's advocating for gay marriages, a Jesuit who should be defrocked and excommunicated, Father James Rosen, a pernicious heretic. And he met with Pope Leo and said he had a positive meeting, and he says he believes that Pope Leo is going to advocate for homosexuals. That's when he had the meeting with the Pope. That's what he said, how it went. And then just I've seen these videos and pictures of him doing blessing gay unions just last week. This is the Jesuit Father James Martin. What are traditionalist Catholics going to do when you have such an extreme left-wing woke Pope? But what are they going to do? Where's the church going to go? Are we going to follow Christ? Are we going to follow Karl Marx and the whims? Orwellian left. Who are you going to follow? What do you do when the Pope goes astray? So that's the challenge that Catholics, traditionalist conservative Catholics, and I was talking to a Catholic friend of mine today, and the fact of the matter is, when Pope Francis was chosen, I think he said this correct. When they chose him as Pope, he said to the other cardinals, "You have committed a grievous sin against God in electing me as Pope." And I agree with that. I think that's probably the only time in his life that Pope Francis spoke true. And it's very disturbing, here in Tyler, Texas, our bishop defrocked, excommunicated. Just anybody who's traditionalist and conservative. I mean, there's an all-out war that Pope Francis is waging against conservatives in the Catholic Church. And I was talking to my Catholic friend today. It's like, well, the fact of the matter is, Pope Francis was not going to allow himself to be succeeded by a moderate or a conservative or traditionalist. It wasn't going to happen. And I was hoping, honestly, even though I'm not Catholic, I think it's good for Christianity if you affirm tradition. You know, I mean, that's what the Catholic Church says. We're about apostolic tradition. Do you think Jesus Christ, you think St. Peter would bring somebody before the altar and bless a homosexual union? You think Jude, the brother of Jesus, would do that when he explicitly writes against it in the Epistle of Jude? You call that affirming Catholic tradition, to be advocating for transgenderism at Rome? I beg to differ. That's that. When things like that happen, because I like Pope Benedict, because Pope Benedict's preaching about Jesus, he's preaching about the New Testament, preaching about the Scriptures, rebuking radical Islam, and it's like this is the kind of Christian leadership we need with Pope Benedict, and they forced him out of office somehow, and they brought in Pope Francis, who's been leading the church astray, now his successor. And I'd rather see a strong, vibrant Catholic Church affirming Catholic Church. I wish they weren't attacking Protestants all the time. It's like, I don't really want this fight. But what can you do? When people attack you, you have the moral obligation duty to defend yourself. Even though I don't want to, it's like, I think we need Christian unity. It's just shocking to see all these attacks every day. Turn on the computer and all these Catholics hating on evangelicals all the time. So this is Pseudo-Ephraim, Syriac, and he has a prophecy here about the Assyrians, oddly enough. I'm not sure what Pseudo-Ephraim is talking about when he's talking about the Assyrians, because is he talking about the Assyrian people, and he could be considered an Assyrian himself, or is he talking about the Assyrian people in a symbolic manner? Because in the Bible, for the most part, this is not exclusively true, we have exceptions, but in certain stories of the Bible, the Assyrians are presented as a militaristic force, right? A military force. Pretty much crushes. I mean, God says the Assyrians are a rod in my hand. I'm using, even though they don't understand my purpose for them. This is what God says. I'm using them to judge the nations. I'm using them to judge Israel. I'm using them to judge Judah. But you look at it, it's like, who are these people attacking us? And like God says, I'm using these people for part of my sovereign plan. And He says, I'm using Assyria to judge the nations. But the Assyrians themselves are not going to escape God's judgment either for their sins. That's what the Bible teaches. So this is a discourse, a memora, basically a sermon of the holy saint Ephrem, the Assyrian teacher concerning the end or final consummation, judgment, and punishment on the people of Gog and Magog and the Antichrist. So this is from the Aramaic. This is the prophecy of Saint Ephrem on about the Assyrians. This is a portion of, I want to read the entire text. I want to read the Latin. First, you should read the Aramaic version because that's the original, then the Latin version. But like I said, Ephrem, one of the earliest of the Aramaic church fathers, is also writing about Bible prophecy. And that's what, when I was talking about the sister, the so-called mother Agapia, Stephanopoulos, Grant Jeffries and others, I mean, you just look at the church fathers, they taught about biblical prophecy just like we do today. It's not a new subject. So what she said, she's not only being dishonest about the church councils, but she thinks that she's assuming that her audience is too lazy. And see, that's the other thing. All these Catholics going to, oh, the church fathers taught all this. It's like, oh, really? Which church fathers? Did you read them? Says who? So you're speaking out of ignorance. I've read the church fathers. Have you? Well, the church fathers, they said that we should follow Christianity as Pope Leo presents it. Mindlessly obey church. The Pope and Pope Leo, the early church fathers says that's the way to go. What Pope Leo is doing, we got to follow that because he's the Pope and you got unquestioned obedience. Disregard the Bible. He tells you what the Bible says anyway. We're just going to follow. That's what the early church fathers say. Okay, what church father said that? How? When? Ignatius? Really? Is that what Ignatius is saying? I don't know. So the church fathers actually condemn some of the behaviors of Pope Francis and Pope Leo. But like I said, these people haven't actually read the church fathers. And, it's the same thing the Muslims do. If you're going to go out there and debate and be involved in apologetics, you should at least have a cursory knowledge of what you're talking about. Better yet, research a subject before you try to start teaching or preaching on it. At least be some familiar with it. See, what the Muslims do is like, I need to deliberately lie. Oh, yes, Islam's all about women's rights. Women are so free. And so what Muslims try to do is they exploit people's ignorance, right? Oh, Islam is just so great for women's rights. We just love women so much. We have so many rights for women. We have so much right for women. We put your women in the West to shame. You think you have rights here? Whew, just go to Sharia law countries. It's incredible how much women's rights we have. It's absurd. And it broke my heart and disturbed me to see how women are treated in the Middle East living over there. It offends me seeing how women are treated. They're human beings made in the image of God. It's disgusting how Muslims treat women. And, before Muhammad, Arabian women he enslaved them. Muhammad did. Enslaved women. Because you had Queen Zenobia is considered an Arabian or Arab. She ruled an empire by her own power. Muhammad put the foot, of men on the neck of women. And, I understand gender roles. I believe that God made men and women for his purposes. It's good to be masculine. It's good to be feminine. I don't like the left attacking so-called, attacking the patriarchy. They're attacking toxic masculinity. There's toxic femininity, too. Women aren't any better than men. We're all fallen and sinful in need of redemption. That's all true. But it offends me to see how women are treated by Islam. Or, oh, yes, we tolerate religions. Christians have it so good under Islamic rule. It's lies. So these Catholics are doing the same thing. Oh, the church fathers, Have you read the church fathers? No. Don't share the meme or make these accusations because it's not correct. It's not good or godly to speak out of ignorance. If you're going to do things like that, just sit down and read the early church fathers before you start making all these comments out of divisive, hateful comments out of ignorance. That's not what the church fathers are about. It's about affirming the faith, not about creating division and attacking fellow Christians. So Ephrem says, a discourse or memora in Aramaic of the holy saint Ephrem, the Assyrian teacher concerning the end, the final consummation, judgment, punishment on the people of Gog and Magog, and about the Antichrist. About Gog and Magog, part of the reason why they date this to around the time of the emergence of Islam is because there's a book called the Aramaic Alexander Romance, and one of the things that this text deals with is the story of Gog and Magog, which is found in the book of the prophet Ezekiel. These are like warriors from the east, and I think sometimes people thought that the Mongols or maybe the Arabian tribes were people, these are these warrior tribes of Gog and Magog. But the Alexander Romance is one of the books that whoever wrote the Quran plagiarized from it. And there's a story of a jihadi from Australia, and he was fighting for, he converts to Islam. He's an Australian, probably a white guy. Travels to, he's so committed to Islam, and he realizes that ISIS is following Islam by the letter. So he travels to Iraq to, kill the Assyrian Christians and the Yazidis, and he's out there raping and murdering for Allah. He's captured on the battlefield, and he's sent to a prison in Australia, and now he has a lot of time on his hands. And so he already learned Arabic. So he learned Arabic, and he's reading the Quran, the Hadith, and he believed it. And it's like, what does Muhammad want me to do? He wants me to go and, following what the Quran, the Hadith says, he goes to fight with ISIS, and, Muhammad says, kill the infidel, kill the Christians, kill the Jews. So he's out there doing it. So now he's in prison, which he deserves. He doesn't deserve to be there. He deserves another fate. The fate that he brought on other people, that's the fate he should have experienced. But he's in this prison. He's got, it's like Club Med, it's like a vacation center. It's a reward for all of his crimes, But he's incarcerated. He has a lot of time in his hands, so he learns Aramaic, which is close to Arabic, and he reads the Aramaic Alexander Romance, which is plagiarized in the Quran. And he realizes that that the Aramaic Alexander romance proves the Quran is fraudulent. And I have a program on that where you can see the text. And they say one in four Muslims are leaving Islam now, and I think it's going to continue to spread because of stories like the men of Al-Zut. What do you do with that? The story reads as if Muhammad's meeting men in the desert for sex. That's what, I mean, if you read it, that's what it says. I didn't write it. The Islamic dilemma, where Muhammad appeals to the authority of the old. He says the gospel. If you want to know what's true, if you want to know if I'm a prophet or not, read the Torah and the Gospels. If you read the Torah and the Gospels, Muhammad's not a prophet. And Muslims cannot respond to that. They can't answer it. They say that the Bible's been corrupted, but that's not what the Quran says. And I'm really surprised that all these so-called Islamic thinkers and theologians, they can't come up with a coherent response to the Islamic agenda. But this was several years ago. The Atlantic magazine had a story on this jihadi who, he's killing the Assyrians and Yazidis out there, raping women, murdering for Allah, and he's in prison. And I want to expand my knowledge and learn Aramaic. I want to learn the sources of the Quran. This book is the source of the Quran. I'm going to read it. And then he reads it. It's like, as a rational person, you can see that this is a false writing, and which proves the Quran to be false. Okay, so let's continue the story. This is very interesting. I'll get to the Assyrians. I'm not trying to be prolonged. I think these are all important subjects. So he talks about the Antichrist. Sister Agapia says, we didn't believe these things in the early church. These beliefs about prophecy were condemned in the Council of 381. What a liar. What a liar. And what's with her, I love 666? Just watch the video. What's your favorite verse in the Bible? 666. What? 666. What are you talking about? Oh, it's my favorite verse in the Bible. Oh, really? What is 666? I'm talking about John 666. Okay, what does that verse say? And people lost their faith in Jesus as the Messiah, and they followed him no more, and they abandoned him. That's my favorite verse in the Bible. It's like, really? What kind of nun is this? Mother Agapia. She's a daughter of not of Christ, but of the devil. And to speak aspersions against Christ and say he's not coming again, and that believing in the second coming is a heresy. Look at her brother too. Wicked people. So let's look at this text here. O Son, Jesus, who has, by his grace, he humbled himself, who is pleased to make himself a human being, who willingly experienced death at the top of the wooden cross on Golgotha. Grant me, my Lord, the ability to speak about the struggles which will take place in the created order, for peoples will fall upon each other, nations will destroy each other, evil will fortify itself on the earth, and iniquity will increase throughout creation. Righteous rulers will perish, the lawless ones shall arise on the earth, and lawless ones, shall arise on the earth. Then a judgment will arise, and weighing the scales for humans, decided concerning the wicked will sink down low. I might read this entire text online, because what Grant Jeffries is doing, he's like, there's one little verse here. I'm going to ignore the entire document. I want to look at this one verse here as a proof text for my belief in a pre-tribulation rapture. But it's like you look at this entire book. It's very fascinating. And then it says, and the Assyrians will gain authority over the region of the Romans. The fruit of their loins they will subjugate. They will also ravish their women. There will be sowing and reaping. They will plant fruits in the ground. They will acquire vast riches and hoard treasures underground, just as the Nile, the river of Egypt, recedes again from where it flooded, so too will Assyria recede back to their own country. For the Assyrians will once again be found in their ancestral lands, meaning the Assyrians' lands. Then evil will increase on the earth, and the land shall be defiled with fornication, and the cry of the persecuted and the wretched will rise up to heaven. Then a judgment will arise. That's the only section I want to look at today, but this is very interesting. And the Assyrians will gain authority over the region of the Romans. And the fruit of their loins they will subjugate. They will also ravish their women. They will be sowing and reaping. They'll be planting fruits in the ground. They will acquire vast riches and hoard treasures under the ground. And then it says, so too will Assyria recede back to their own country, for the Romans will again once be found in their ancestral lands. It kind of sounds like things that have been happening during our time. What do I mean? Maybe when it's talking about the Assyrians, it's not talking about the literal Assyrians. It's talking about them in a spiritual or metaphorical, symbolic way. It could be talking about the armies of the Muslims as a militaristic people, right? So right now, they have made their way into talking about Pope Pope Leo has built a mosque inside the Vatican for the Muslims. So there's this movie called The Cartoon, and Charlton Heston's in it. He plays General, so-called Chinese Gordon. General Gordon, this famous British, very devout Christian. It's a good movie. I recommend watching it. But he goes against an Islamic leader, the Osama bin Laden, Ayatollah of his time, a man they call the Mahdi. This is in Sudan. And Sudan was like a Egyptian colony, and Egypt was a British protectorate. So this is Anglo-Egyptian Sudan, right? They're working together, Egypt and England. So you have this terrorist movement spearheaded by like I said, the Osama bin Laden, the Ayatollah of his day, this man called the Mahdi. And in the movie, they have General Gordon and the Mahdi having a conversation. I don't know how historical that is. Of course, the Mahdi eventually had General Gordon died in Khartoum in the end, and it mobilized the British. Actually, it's like, what's going on now? I've said this before. My book is coming out. Every 1,500 years, it's the first war that America fought. The first foreign war was against the Barbary pirates. In North Africa, they were taking Americans, or actually had plantations in North Africa, where they were capturing and enslaving Americans. And we were being attacked by these, taking people hostage, enslaving them. So the Marines actually had to go in there and fight against they're Muslim terrorists. The Barbary Wars, we had several of them, the beginning of our history as an independent nation. So the British are fighting the Mujahideen, the Islamic Jihad in Sudan. But there's a scene in the movie where the Mahdi's talking to Charlton Heston's character, Chinese Gordon. He says, I will pray in the Mosque of Cairo. I'll pray in the Mosque of Jerusalem. I'll pray in the Mosque of Athens. I'll pray in the Mosque of Rome. What is he saying? He says, when we're there and we're praying, we've conquered you. We've subjugated you. So what is Pope Leo? I don't get it. I don't get it. Oh, we need to have a mosque inside the Vatican. It's like you can walk around the walls of the Vatican in 1 hour. It's one of the smallest independent nations on the earth. So why do we have to have a mosque in the Vatican where Peter was crucified upside down, died for our Lord as a martyr? You're going to build a mosque where Peter died. Blasphemy, sacrilege against Peter. And Pope Leo did it. And the Mahdi's like, I will pray in the Mosque of Rome. Because it means I intend, the Mahdi's like, the Lord struck the Mahdi down. I think he died of natural causes for plague or disease. So he's trying to defeat the British and kills Chinese Gordon, a devout Christian. And yet he died. I think he died before the British got there. The Lord smote that wicked man down. But still his followers continued his fight, and they actually had to be defeated by the British. So, this is what's happening right now, right? The fruit of their loin, they're conquering with the fruit of their loin, subjugating them, ravishing their women. In Europe, you have this explosion of rapes. Rape is a horrible thing, but statistically, European men, it's not European men who are raping women. Any man that rapes a woman is horrific. I'm not apologizing or justifying. I'm just saying, statistically, it's very low. Who's raping these women in Europe? I remember, and it outrages me, in Copenhagen. Oh, you women need to... A female mayor of the city. Oh, you women shouldn't go out and dress immodestly. You're provoking the Muslims, and you're bringing rape on yourself. What's with these leftists? Liberals are just such subhuman garbage. To act that way, to defend this type of, defending rape. It's incredible. We're, I don't watch CNN, but it's like just going around in public, have these TVs on with the CNN on. There's a war on women. It's like, what, really? Yeah, conservatives have a war on women. What are you talking about? War on women. That's a war on women, where, you got all these migrants there and a woman can't walk down the street safely. And your government, if they're allowed to victimize you, they make, they defend them and apologize for them. But then it says, Assyria will recede back to their own country, and the Romans will be found again in their ancestral land. I mean, I won't be surprised that the Romans might represent Western civilization. And yeah, we found ourselves back. It's probably inevitable we'll find ourselves back with our soldiers in that region again. I've been there twice. So that's interesting. It's prophecies about the Assyrians going, maybe, I hope it's true that they go abroad but go back to their homeland as well. I think we need to see Assyria established as an independent nation again. But it's very interesting. I could talk about that later. You know, when we look at this literature, I think you should look at it at its own value and merits, not just try to find one little verse to prove a disputed theological point. You have to look at the literature as a whole. And it's very fascinating. The book on the prophecies written by Pseudo-Ephraim. Very fascinating, interesting subject. And it contains these prophecies, specifically mentioning the Assyrians. And that's the other thing. It's like, what he's saying, he's using the terminology of the Assyrians. I'm not sure what he means by it. But you could say that Pseudo-Ephraim is saying that the Assyrians are going to be players in the last days, right? There's going to, you look at these different ethnicities and peoples, Gog and Magog, and these other people, and you know, the people representing the Romans, but it's mentioning the last days, the Assyrians being there and being involved in the sequence of events that take place at the end of days before the second coming of our Lord and the establishment of the kingdom of God on earth as is in heaven. So, join us for our next program, A Voice of the Word. Thank you, and God bless you.